Hey, yo, what's up, y'all? Back at it once again. It's a Koski of Fun Day. Dropping this knowledge for you and for yours. And we continue on with the series, um, The Morals in North America, which is not really discussed among our people a lot. That our people did escape from the slave boats and started up their own communities here in the United States. Many, many big ones, and all throughout the South and the northern states when they had them up there too. Slavery was legal up there. And this time we doing the state of Louisiana. And Louisiana has been well known for many slave revolts, but it's not really talked about most of the time in Maroon communities. So let's get into this. The persistent specter, slave rebellion in the Territorial, Louisiana. There is no problem in the study of the American Negro slavery so thorny as a problem of slave rebellion, nor as an aspect of slave experience so inadequately treated. It's a problem compounded by the hopeless confusion preventing the matter of definition. How does one determine what constitutes an actual rebellion against the slave status as opposed to some form of resistance to immediate circumstances? Similarly, by what criteria does one determine the existence of an actual conspiracy among potential rebels as opposed to mere rumor of conspiracy? Can rebellion be distinguished from revolt and or resistance? No one seems to agree. The problem of rebellion is further compounded by the apparent inability of scholars to divest themselves of the bias and preconception. However objective one tries to be, it seems he will inevitably commit himself to a position asserting either one, that rebelliousness was enviable, inevitable, and chronic in the slave system, as the urge for freedom was constant and compelling, or two, that a rebellion was markedly exceptional, even a burn in the world of slaves and the slave holders. The reason for the apparent contradiction is, I think, readily apparent. First, rebellion, insurrection, revolution are terms that are entered value change, terms that deposit elements of ideological commitment in their very use. Whoever writes about slave rebellion does reveal much of their own variety view of slavery, and possibly his own attitude towards blacks in general, either by affirming the rebellion as a necessary containment of oppression or minimizing rebellion as unnecessary. That's extremely rare, as in those cases who see the slave system as essential, paternalistic, and benign, or impossible, a position often held by those who see it as a system of stifling oppressive. Although none of the many recent studies in this particular institution has ignored the problem, there is little to no real agreement that the extent of the nature of the Alabama slave rebellion and the entire matter continues as a state of some considered confusion. Yet another dimension of the problem of the rebellion lies in the extremely possibly of reliable sources from the rebels or co-conspirators themselves. With very few exceptions, the survivors of slave uprisings were not permitted the privilege of a public statement in their personal defense, much less in defense of the rising itself. Most of what are known in any specific episode be actually of the insurrection, conspiracy to the rebel, or just a rumor is known from white sources only. And whites living among the substantial numbers of slaves tend to harbor extremely complex and confused attitudes toward the threat of rebellion, about which more Antion. White sources simply cannot be read on face value on the matter, not least for the reason being that they are inevitably inconsistent and frequently contradictory, which once the acute problem be definitely the study of a slave rebellion then. There is no reason to wonder at the confused state of scholarship on this subject. It is not my intention to unravel the confusion in this analysis of certain aspect of the slave rebellion in Territorial, Louisiana. Indeed, if at any purpose other than we have some purely prescriptive material, it is to offer to the Louisiana experience that such a case study is difficult in analysis of insurrection. Having taken a long look at the matter and having given some hard thought, I'm finding more questions than answers in the sources. But there are, I believe, some matters deserving consideration, even in the view of the problems. Not only because the revolutionary experience among Black Louisianans deserves investigation, but also the Territorial Louisiana provides special circumstances that lend themselves to new consideration on the subject. and hopefully additional light on some, though by no means all of the dark corners of the problem. There's another reason for considering the subject in Territorial Louisiana setting. It was a period in place currently beset with various forms of rebellion or insurrection or revolution. From the very outset, the beleaguered Governor William C. Claiborne contends with a possibility of attempting a coup by either the Spanish or the French, both much in evidence. The West Florida Rebellion of 1810, while working to benefit American interests, was still assuredly a rebellion. Mexico seemed to be in a state of constant turmoil, bringing tensions to the immediate west of Noches. And to the south, 1810 and 1811 saw revolutionary movements for independence in Paraguay, Cartagena, and Guatemala, as well as Mexico. The French Revolution had disturbing repercussions in Louisiana, and there is still the memory of the Great Santo Domingo insurrection of 1793, burned indelibly in the consciences of slave owners everywhere. All the more so Louisiana because the white refugees from that Holocaust were available in numbers to remind the nervous Louisianans of their potential powder keg. The new slave imports, constantly arriving from points unknown, were highly calculated to allay the fears. Although Congress had acted to forbid further importation of slaves to Louisiana after October 1st, 1804, Governor Claiborne had feared, and justifiably, that there would be a rush to import slaves prior to that date and harbored no doubt that smuggling would continue to provide new bondsmen afterwards from many of the volatile Western Indies. Clearly then, the specter of the Black insurrection was a constant reality in the minds of whites. And white fears were reflected at the time and again in reports of conspiracy or rumors of slave unrest. Most important of all, the year 1811 saw the threat become reality in the largest form of the largest slave rebellion uprising in the history of the United States along the Old River Road northwest of New Orleans. The threat and rumors of insurrection seemed to come in spurts. The years 1804 to 1805 represented one such spurt period. Reports that the Black was thought to be contemplating a revolt arrived in New Orleans with discouraging regularity. On October 1804, for example, Governor Claiborne received an insurrection report from the Natchez district. "I hasten to inform you," wrote the district commander, "that the tranquility of this district has received a violent shock, and the inhabitants are now in the greatest state of alarm. The insurrection company has been uncovered, in which some 30 Blacks were involved. Especially noteworthy was the notion that the pilot had involved in a purported effort to escape the Spanish Noches, and both the Spanish and the Indian conspirators were implicated." Again, in November 1804, Claiborne was first to dispatch a military senate to Point Coupee, where, as he wrote, a spirit of insurrection among the Negroes at Point Coupee has an occasionally considerable alarm in that district. The specter of insurrection struck far close to the home in October 1805, where a plot was uncovered in the city of New Orleans, which appeared to have substantial numbers of slaves, upward of 30s at least, who planned to kill all the city officials and take over the city. The plot was aborted, but the threat had been very real. Also, it appeared to terrify the whites of the city. Not only suspected terror by virtue of their previous threats, and it seemed by then to be unremitting. But until 1811, nothing in the way of actual violent insurrection ever got off the ground. For all the rumors, and there were a myriad, it seemed particular that some apparent actual conspiracy, fighting the reality of the slaves, actually seizing weapons and attacking whites had not materialized. In January of 1811, it happened. It began Wednesday last, noted one white observer, to have a miniature representation of the horrors of Santo Domingo. The details of the 1811 insurrections are by no means altogether clear, and it's doubtful we will ever know exactly what transpired. What we do know, where it happened, and however, are able to sketch enough details to form a recognizable picture. The uprising began late in the evening of January 8th, 1811, on a plantation of Colonel Manuel Audrey, or Andre. The sources use alternate spellings. Located in the German coast of County. some 36 miles northwest of New Orleans near the present-day Norco. According to all contemporary accounts, the leader of the revolt was a mulatto slave, probably of Santo Domingo origins, and the property of widow Baptiste Deslondes. At the time of the insurrection, he was a temporary employee of the Colonel Audrey. His name, Charles, is the only other thing known about him, except that he had made prior arrangements with, among others, other Audrey slaves to instigate the resurrection. The first move was directed toward Audrey himself and his son. The insurgents killed the young man and then wounded the father and made their escape from the plantation. Within a short time after this opening assault, the initial group had a prearranged rendezvous with a support group, which included slaves from adjoining plantations, as well as a number of maroon slaves who had been living in the woods as fugitives. From this rendezvous point, the insurgents moved southeast on a river road towards New Orleans, attacking other plantations en route, burning several and buttressing their forces with their arms and additional men. By the following afternoon, January 9th, 1811, they arrived at Jacques Fortier Plantation, some 5 leagues distance according to one source, where they commenced killing poultry, cooking, eating, drinking, and riding. Whatever the drinking and riding suggested in this account rendered the insurrections less formidable is a moot point. But it's clear that the majority of the whites miles around, up and down the German coast, were terrified. And from the very onset of the rebellion, began to evacuate the area. Indeed, the first word of outbreak arrived in New Orleans by way of a planning fight to the city, and the protection it afforded. Carriage after carriage, loaded with white family and a few personal belongings, began pouring into town within hours of the initial uprising. But even as the evacuation progressed, suppression forces began organizing under the leadership of Manuel Audrey himself. Within 24 hours of the initial attack, Audrey had mobilized some 80 local militia troops and vigilantes and set up to pursue the rebels, by then numbering 150 to 155. The whites attacked, according to Audrey's statement, near the plantation of Francois Bertrand Bedouin, where the rebels stood on their ground, colors displayed in full ignorance. Their leaders mounted in some cases, uniform, but they were woefully deficient in firepower and in military organization. They retreated into the woods where whites would be forced to pursue them under difficult circumstances, particularly in the view of the prevailing cold and rain. Meanwhile, Audrey had communicated with Claiborne, calling for assistance from the regular U.S. Army troops. He and other planners were in luck. On January 7, 1811, General Wade Hampton, Commander-in-Chief of U.S. troops in the Southern Division, had arrived in New Orleans. Hampton was quickly dispatched to the scene of rebellion in command of attachment of regular troops and 2 company militias to take charge of all suppression forces. Moreover, additional assistance was already from the way from Baton Rouge in the form of a company of dragoons and 1 light artillery command under Major Homer Virgil Milton. The insurrections were armed with cane, knives, axes, hoes, and other tools, and few small arms when the pursuit came into the woods beginning the morning of January 10th. What followed was hardly a battle at all. It was more of a form of mass execution, an open season on blacks in the vicinity. By mid-morning of January 11, when Wade forces had joined that of Major Milton at Dashwood Plantation, anything resembling a military operation was already over. Hampton wrote Claiborne from Dashwood informing the governor that he had dispatched 2 companies, 1 of light artillery and 1 of dragoon, to touch every settlement of consequence and crush any disturbance that may have taken their place higher up. The chiefs of the party, he informed Claiborne, are taken. By 10 o'clock in the evening of January 11, Audrey could write Claiborne that the insurrection was completely broken and that the leaders, including Charles Deslondes, has been killed or captured. The blacks had been decimated. Actual body count revealed 66 killed in battle or summarily executed, 17 missing, and 16 captive and held for trial. But the same on-the-scene report also revealed that the Bureau of Vaz, many bodies, were still being uncovered by patrols. The trial of those captured or accused in participation commenced immediately. St. Charles Parish Judge Pierre Baquet St. Martin summoned a special court consisting of 5 local property owners to hear the testimony and render judgment. By the afternoon of January 13th, the tribunal was prepared to open hearings on the Deslondes plantation. Interrogation proceeded, and for the next 2 days, the court heard some 30 of the accused. Most admitted their guilt. Some accused others, citing specifics. Many refused to implicate anyone other than themselves. When they asked why he had joined the insurrection, one of the rebel leaders named Jupiter, property of Emmanuel Aldry, simply to kill the whites. 21 of the accused were found guilty and sentenced to death. Despite a long-standing tradition to the contrary, they were shot and not beheaded. But their corpses were, in fact, decapitated and their heads placed on poles along the German coast as a terrible example for all those who disturb the public tranquility in the future. 3 of those implicated were judged innocent and released to return to their bondage. 6 were held in captive, preventing further investigation. Their ultimate fate was not recorded. The physical damage perpetrated by the insurgents is a matter of some conjecture. At least 2 whites were killed, young Audrey and Francois Bolson Charpentier, who was killed by the rebels in their assault on his plantation. And the loss of these 2 highly esteemed citizens was officially bemoaned by the governor in his report to the joint session of the Territorial legislature. Claiborne claiming that they had been cruelly massacred. He also added, however, that the slave insurrection had caused great and serious loss of property into the planters of the region, and at specific request of the government, the legislature passed an appropriation to reimburse the planters for their loss to a tune of 1/3 of the appraised value of each house the one destroyed. The act also provided that the territory would pay $300 to the slave owner for each slave killed or executed on account of the late insurrection in that territory. There remained but for the governor to assure the populace that the danger had passed, and indeed, there had never been any real danger at all. This he did by asserting the rebellion was not been a consistent combination, but a result of only a few concerts between slaves and a few adjoining plantations. He has continued, have been steadily and entirely quelled. He called privately, however, that the insurrection has awakened a spirit of vigilance throughout the territory, which, if persistent, will tend very much to our future safety. Claiborne was also in hopes that the legislature might be stung in the fear of future rebellion and improving the militia system and curbing further importation of slaves outside the territory. Pursuant to the government recommendation, the territorial legislation indeed passed new legislation completely reorganizing the territorial militia in order to be more quickly to respond to threats of slave rebellion. But what is the general response to insurrection at its inception? Clearly, it ran to a pattern. The initial reaction was terror, panic, flight, the formation of a counterforce, then a crushing military suppression, then vigilante assault and a bloodbath. A great example to other slaves that Emmanuel already had insisted was necessary in his first correspondence with Claiborne. And finally, post-insurrection measures to prevent other such horrors. Yet, even as white and inevitably so vividly their fears of loathing, they are also manifesting what social psychologists call rationalization need, to believe that the actual slave rebellion did not really occur, at least not among the good, tried and true, utterly reliable homegrown blacks, at least not sizable. Careful planned insurrections representing any real danger to the white population or the slave system. The very terminology employed by whites to describe this rebellion suggests that they saw was not an insurrection or chattel bondsmen striking for freedom, even with Santo Domingo as a case of clear example that can be used in such cases, but rather a criminal depredation. Now, that's what I want to pause on for a minute on that one when they said a criminal degradation, because our African martyrs are not criminals. You know, and they beat that in their head so bad that our African heroes are criminals. You know what I'm saying? And that's not true. Back to the reading. The 2 terms that often describe the rebels as brigand, lawless plunderers, and Biante, outlaws, the investigators were believed to have been runaway maroons, not faithful house servants, even after it came to light that Jean Francois Templeton had been killed by one of his own people who was also a rebel leader. They needed to blame outsiders and patiently clear in the white resources. They bore and blamed new arrivals and fought persistently against a further introduction to those there was no evidence in the trial record to suggest that the newcomers consisted either leadership or the majority of the rebels. Wade Hampton blamed the Spanish for the uprising. The plan was unquestionably of Spanish origin, he wrote from the battlefield, and has an extensive combination. This belief persisted despite the fact there is no direct evidence of Spanish complicity, and that Cleveland reported that the plot was not widely spread. Some of the participants believed that the instigators of the conspiracy had come through the agency of Jean Lafayette by way of Territorial, though there is again no evidence to support such claim. Whites then found it necessary to blame outside editorials for the whole trouble, and did also over and over as though reciting a formal litany. To do so otherwise was to call in question the security of the slave plantation system itself, and this they could not do, at least not consciously. I am suggesting that it's possible for the whites to admit openly there can ever become a dangerous rising of slaves, even when the evidence of great fear is so overwhelming. The duality of perception involved here is clearly manifest in the letter written at the time of the insurrection by New Orleans merchant Peter V. Ogden to the customer in Mississippi. A little disturbance among the Negroes of the coast, Ogden wrote, has put a stop for the woman of all kinds of business. The little disturbance had brought a temporary halt to all type of commercial operations in one of the burgeoning commercial capitals of the United States. But Ogden apparently saw no inconsistency with this statement. Such is the nature of duality arising from the rationalization need to distort their unthinkable reality. And what are the blacks? What do we conclude about their motives, their response to rebellions, their aspirations? Sad to say, conclusions cannot simply be drawn. If we accept the evidence of the white sources, it would seem that only a minority of the slaves in the regions participated in the insurrection, and that other slaves and free blacks helped put it down. Indeed, census figures suggest that no more than 8% of the German coast area slaves were involved. Shortly after the rebellion had been defeated, the Legislative Council passed resolutions calling for the investigation and action of the slaves who had distinguished themselves during the late insurrections by saving the life of their master or some other white person. So that heroic action might be duly rewarded. I'm talking about manumission, like Dr. Claude Anderson said, manumission Ramirez. This plays a lot out. They always pick their little house niggas out. You know what I'm saying? And reward them and put them over people. One absorber of the actual fighting, Charles Perret, named several free persons of colors who he deemed worthy of the Republic. Free blacks who lent aid in defeating the rebel slaves with indefeatable zeal and intrepid courage. Doubtless it was so, though when it fit into the pattern that other rationalization needs the whites had to believe to be so. Despite the size of the uprising, it bears repeating that this was the largest slave insurrection in U.S. history. Surely it's not surprising that most did not join the rebels to do battle with the whites. As J.C. Davis pointed out, when the choice between losing their chains or their lives, most people will choose to keep their chains. Still the same today. Let me read it again. As James C. Davy pointed out, when it comes to the choice between losing their chains or losing their lives, most people will keep their chains. And without a question, this was a choice open to blacks of the German coast in 1811. They quite literally had no chance, confronting a resistance among whites who had all the advantages of organization, structure, and military firepower, and whose ferocity was ascertained in the view of their fear. The black effort was suicidal. But it was not, and at least in one respect, in vain. Whatever the motives of the leaders, and there was doubtless mixed, insurrections such as January 1811 were among the factors operating to keeping the system of plantation slavery in a chronic state of tension in the early 19th century. To a point degree, the fear is born out of occasional insurrection, however abortive, weakening the system by undermining its security and giving rise to the doubts of the validity even among the leading beneficiaries and the loudest publicists. It also likely that the insurrection gave rise to a moral and a material conditions among the slaves in the region. And yet another way that the rebels did succeed in 1811 succeed, they became legends. As late as 1923, we are informed by residents of the German coast area, the old Negroes still relate the story of the slave insurrection of 1811 as they heard it from their grandfathers. Legendary military defeats have only often to serve later generations in their struggles for survival. But for all the conforming, distortive, and rationalization of the whites, the thing it could not rational way was the Specter. On January 19th, 1811, as the last reported action against the rebels were coming in the Governor Claiborne, he wrote Jean No Deslondes, I hope this dreadful insurrection is at an end, and I pray God that we may never see another one. Yet before the year was out, the hurried governor again confronted the nightmare. On Christmas Eve, 1811, Claiborne wrote to Manuel Army informing him of a rumor of insurrection conspiracy among the Negroes and German coast, calling for a reorganization of a regiment of militia forces, lately under your command. Once again, the white panicked into flight by report, which suggested for the New Orleans blacks also evidence of the disposition in the rising insurrection. The specter will not be still. It is persistent, as well as the reality of the rebellion will not simply permit the whites to live in peace, even on Christmas. Fear of the revolt led to very hard relationship between the slaves and the master, and thus the fundamental creation of distrust by the whites, even as the whites created their own psychic salvation, the myth of the content bondsman. So there you have it, people. You know what I'm saying? There you have it. That's the insurrection of German coast insurrection of 1811. And that gives you the white point of view of it, about how they were scared and shook up. Even though this wasn't the largest insurrection, that's false. But an insurrection like this had them scared, where they would just run. You know what I'm saying? They would panic run, then come back and retaliate and overdo it. And that's how they got down. You know what I'm saying? But that's, even though they said this stuff was suicidal, that's no need to fight, Sometimes it's better just to die than live with these chains on your feet. You feel me? You know what I'm saying? Or you just keep on being a slave, but hey, you just still don't die 1,000 deaths. Anyway, this is Koski of Fun Day. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We're going to be dropping stuff like this. Slave rebellion in the Territorial, Louisiana. The German coast insurrection. So have a good one. Peace and enjoy.